"Why are you running away from me, human?" said the alien princess. Tears in her eyes, the sun hung low over the grand city of Zarath 9, its golden rays casting long shadows across the vast palace grounds. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers, their vibrant colors reflecting the beauty and power of the royal world. Today was meant to be a day of peace talks, a day when political leaders from different parts of the galaxy would meet to discuss their differences. Yet Commander Jace, a human diplomat who had reluctantly joined the conference, felt an unusual sense of unease. Jace was used to diplomacy. He had been on countless peace missions, negotiating with alien races that could tear each other apart with a glance. His role as a representative of humanity was simple enough, be the calm voice in the storm. But here, in the heart of the Zarethian Empire, he felt out of place. The palace around him was too ornate, the halls too silent, and then there was the alien princess, Zalira. He had heard her name whispered among the leaders and attendants, always with a mix of awe and fear. Zalira was not just a princess, she was the heir to the throne of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Her people, the Zarethians, had a reputation for ruthlessness and strength, but that was not what intrigued Jace. No, it was the whispers about her, whispers that spoke of a woman trapped in her royal life, suffocating under the weight of her family's expectations. And when he first saw her, alone in the garden, his curiosity got the best of him. It had been a chance meeting, one he hadn't expected. Jace had taken to wandering the grounds of the palace, trying to clear his mind after an exhausting round of discussions. He wasn't looking for anyone in particular, but when he saw her standing there, her back to him, her silver hair shimmering in the sunlight, he couldn't help but stop. She was not like the other aliens he had met. She carried herself with an aura of grace and authority, yet there was something in her posture, in the way she stood, that seemed almost fragile. Her shoulders were slumped, her gaze distant, lost in thought. It was as though the weight of the entire universe rested on her alone. Jace approached slowly, unsure if he should intrude. But there was something in her presence that pulled him closer, a feeling he couldn't explain. "Your Highness," he began, his voice polite but cautious, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Zalira turned, her violet eyes meeting his, and for a moment there was a strange silence. Her gaze was intense but not unkind. There was sadness in her eyes, a sadness that spoke volumes despite the walls she had carefully built around herself. "No, you are not disturbing me," she said softly, her voice carrying an unexpected warmth. "I prefer solitude, though I am not often allowed it." Jace didn't know what to say. He had read about her, heard rumors, but he had never expected to find such vulnerability in the princess of the Zarethian Empire. I was just taking a walk," he said, feeling awkward. "This garden is beautiful." "It is," she agreed, her lips curving into a faint smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "The flowers are the only things that don't ask for anything in return." There was a long pause between them, the silence stretching out like an unspoken question. Jace felt like an intruder, unsure of how to continue. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said at last, trying to break the tension. "I thought a person of your station would be surrounded by guards or advisors." Zalira chuckled softly, a sound that was both bitter and amused. "I am always surrounded by people, yet I feel more alone than I ever have in my life." She looked away, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "It is a strange thing to have so many people care for you, but none of them truly see you for who you are." Jace frowned. He wasn't used to hearing such words from royalty. Most of the time, people like her were powerful, untouchable, and expected to carry the burdens of their empire with strength and dignity. But Zalira didn't seem to fit that mold. There was something raw and real about her, something that made Jace feel as though she was far more human than any of the politicians he'd met. "I know what you mean," Jace said, his voice quieter now. "Sometimes it feels like the more people expect from you, the less you can be yourself. But maybe that's just the price we pay for power." Zalira turned back to him then, her eyes narrowing slightly as if considering his words. "You think I have power?" Jace nodded, unsure if he had said the right thing. "You are the princess of the Zarethian Empire. You control vast territories. People look to you for leadership." She tilted her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips once more, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Yes, I suppose I do, but power isn't what it seems, not the way they make it out to be." She paused, her voice softer now. "Sometimes I wish I could run away, leave it all behind and disappear into the stars, but I can't. The Empire needs me. My people need me." Jace felt a strange tug in his chest, as if her words had struck something deep within him. He couldn't understand the weight of what it must be like to carry such a burden, to have your entire life dictated by the expectations of others. He had his own battles, of course, but nothing like this. "I don't know what it's like," he admitted, "but it sounds suffocating." Zalira sighed, a sound that carried the weight of all the years she had spent trapped in her royal life. "It is. But that is the price I must pay for being who I am." There was another long pause as they stood there, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the garden. The sound of distant voices could be heard, the hum of the palace life continuing without them. Yet in that moment everything seemed to slow down. Jace felt the urge to say something, to offer comfort, to reassure her, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say to someone like her? A princess who had never known true freedom. "Why are you here, Commander?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft but firm. "Why did you come to this planet if you do not want to be part of their politics? What is it that you are really searching for?" The question caught him off guard. It wasn't something he had expected from her. But as he thought about it, he realized that he didn't have a clear answer. He wasn't sure why he had come. The talks were important, of course, but there was something more, something that had driven him here. He didn't know what it was, but it felt like the universe had pulled him in this direction for a reason. "I'm here because I have to be," Jace said at last, his voice distant. "But maybe there's more to this than just politics." Zalira studied him for a moment, her gaze softening. "Maybe there is," she said quietly. Just then, a loud voice broke the moment. One of the royal guards called out to the princess, a reminder that her time was running out. Zalira turned toward the sound, and Jace noticed a shift in her demeanor. The sadness was still there, but it was quickly masked by the strength and poise she had learned to carry as a member of the royal family. "I must go," she said, her voice once more cold and distant. "The Empire does not wait for its princess to rest." Jace nodded, feeling a pang of regret in his chest. He hadn't expected to connect with her so quickly. But now, as she walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just met someone who was far more than a princess. Someone who, despite the power she held, was just as lost and trapped as anyone else. As Zalira disappeared into the distance, Jace found himself asking the same question over and over again in his mind. What would it be like to run away? To leave behind everything that had been thrust upon them? What if, for once, they could just be free? But for now, Jace could only watch as she walked away, the weight of the galaxy still resting on her shoulders. The days that followed seemed to pass in a blur for Commander Jace. He couldn't shake the image of Princess Zalira from his mind. The conversation they had shared in the garden replayed in his thoughts over and over again, and despite himself, he found himself wanting to know more about her. She had opened up to him in a way he hadn't expected, showing him a side of her that no one else seemed to understand. The conference continued in full swing, with leaders and dignitaries from across the galaxy discussing trade deals, military alliances, and political matters. Yet Jace couldn't fully engage in the conversations. His mind kept wandering back to the princess, to her sadness and vulnerability, and the way she had looked at him when she asked why he was running away. He wasn't sure what that question meant, but something in her voice had struck him deeply. It wasn't just the sadness in her eyes, but the underlying fear. Fear of being trapped, of being forced into a life she hadn't chosen. It reminded him of his own struggles, the expectations placed upon him as a diplomat. He had always known what was expected of him, what he had to do, but he had never felt like he truly belonged in the role. And Zalira, she was even more trapped than he was. Jace found himself looking for her at every opportunity, even if he didn't know what he'd say to her. He had already told himself that he couldn't get involved in her life, not in any meaningful way. But the more he saw her, the more he realized that she was more than just the powerful princess he had read about. She was human, in her own way. And for the first time in his life, he was starting to feel something deeper than the political games that surrounded him. It wasn't long before he saw her again, this time in the palace's vast hall. He was standing by one of the large windows, looking out at the horizon, when he spotted her across the room. Zalira stood with her back to him, speaking with a group of dignitaries from a distant star system. She appeared calm and poised, just as a princess should be, but there was an unmistakable stiffness in her posture that told Jace she was uncomfortable. Without thinking, he moved toward her. It wasn't the most diplomatic move, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that diplomacy wasn't what he needed at that moment. He needed to understand her, to know what lay behind the mask she wore so expertly. As he drew closer, one of the dignitaries caught sight of him and nodded in greeting, but Zalira's eyes remained fixed ahead, unaware of his approach. It was only when he was nearly beside her that she turned and saw him. Her eyes softened, and the usual walls she had put up around her expression seemed to slip away for just a moment. "Commander," she said, her voice warm yet guarded, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same about you," Jace replied, offering a small, genuine smile. "It seems like you're always in the middle of something important." Zalira didn't smile back, but she did take a small step away from the group of dignitaries, her expression shifting into something more personal. "Not always," she admitted, her voice low. "I've had enough of politics for one day." Jace raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I thought a princess like you would enjoy the attention." "I don't," she said simply, her eyes darting to the group of dignitaries who were now deep in conversation, as if waiting for her to return. "The truth is, I'd rather be anywhere but here, but I have a duty. My people need me." Jace could hear the weariness in her voice, the weight of responsibility that pressed down on her every word. It was the same kind of weight that Jace had always felt, the pressure to live up to expectations, to fulfill a role that was assigned to you the moment you were born. But where Jace had been able to leave his work behind at the end of each day, Zalira had no escape. She lived it every moment. "You don't have to do this," Jace said before he could stop himself. The words felt bold, but he meant them. He saw the way she looked at the other dignitaries as if she didn't belong with them. "You could walk away. You could leave all of this behind." Zalira looked at him then, really looked at him. Her violet eyes searched his face as if she were weighing his words, trying to find out if he truly meant them or if he was simply speaking out of politeness. "I can't," she said quietly, her voice filled with a quiet resignation. "I've been trained my whole life to take on this responsibility, to be the face of the empire, my family. They would never allow me to leave." She sighed, and for the briefest moment, Jace saw something break through her carefully constructed mask, a flash of fear, of longing. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but Jace noticed it. "Then why are you telling me this?" Jace asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Because," she started, her voice faltering slightly, "I'm starting to wonder if I can trust anyone anymore. I've spent so much of my life pretending to be something I'm not, doing things I don't want to do, and now, I'm not sure if I even know who I am anymore." Jace's heart went out to her. He knew what it was like to feel lost, to feel like your entire life was controlled by others, even though you were the one doing all the work. But he had never felt it quite as acutely as Zalira. Her entire identity seemed to be built around her title, her family, and the empire she had been born to lead. She had never been given the chance to define herself on her own terms. "You're not alone," Jace said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm here if you need someone to talk to." Zalira didn't respond right away. She only stared at him, her face unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, just when Jace thought the conversation had ended, she spoke again. "I don't know why I'm telling you all of this," she admitted softly. "I've never spoken to anyone like this before, but I feel like I can trust you." Jace felt a strange sense of warmth in his chest. He didn't know why she trusted him, why she felt she could confide in him of all people. But it wasn't a feeling he wanted to dismiss. He had seen how the others treated her, like an object to be admired, a pawn to be used for political gain. But here, in this moment, Zalira was showing him something real, something that made her more than just a princess. "I'm glad you do," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "You deserve to be seen for who you really are, Zalira, not just for your title." She looked away for a moment, and when she looked back at him, there was a softness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You will," Jace said, giving her a reassuring smile. "You'll figure it out, one step at a time." Zalira's lips curled into the smallest of smiles, though it was filled with both sadness and gratitude. "Thank you, Commander." Jace felt his heart skip a beat. He didn't know why, but hearing her call him by his rank made him feel a strange sense of responsibility. As if he were the only person in the galaxy who could help her. "I'm here," Jace said, his voice steady, "and I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, it seemed as if the entire world around them had faded into the background. There were no politics, no royal duties, no empire. Just two people, standing in the quiet hall of a palace, sharing a moment of connection. But as the sounds of approaching footsteps grew louder, Zalira's expression shifted. The mask of royalty slid back into place, and she straightened, her shoulders squaring as she turned her attention back to the dignitaries. "I should go," she said, her voice taking on a more formal tone once more. "Duty calls." Jace nodded, his heart heavy with the knowledge that this moment was over. But even as she turned away, he couldn't help but wonder if their paths were meant to cross again. Something told him that their connection, however brief, was only the beginning of something far more complicated and far more important than either of them could have anticipated. As Zalira walked back to the waiting group, Jace couldn't shake the feeling that her story wasn't over yet. And somehow his own story had just become a part of hers. The next few days passed in a haze of diplomatic discussions, formal meetings, and the unrelenting pressure of maintaining peace between rival factions. Commander Jace found himself drowning in a sea of political maneuvering, but his mind constantly drifted back to Princess Zalira. He tried to focus on his work, but every time he looked around the palace, he caught glimpses of her, always surrounded by her royal entourage, always carrying the weight of her empire on her shoulders. Jace couldn't help but notice the contrast between the way she appeared in public and how she was when they spoke alone. In front of others, Zalira wore her crown like a mask, her face impassive and regal, the very picture of control. But when it was just the two of them, she let her guard down, even if only for a moment. It was in those moments that Jace saw the real Zalira, the one who was tired of pretending, the one who yearned for freedom. It was clear to him now. Zalira was trapped, and not just by her royal duties, but by the expectations of her people, her family, and the galaxy. She had been groomed for this life from the moment she was born, with no choice but to carry on the legacy of the Zarethian Empire. And yet, despite all the power she wielded, she seemed powerless in her own life. She was a prisoner of her own identity. Jace couldn't understand why she hadn't left the palace, why she hadn't just walked away from it all. But as the days went by, he began to realize that it wasn't so simple. Zalira didn't just have her empire to worry about, she had the future of her people. And in her heart, she believed she was the only one who could save them. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jace found himself walking alone through the palace gardens once again. He needed a break, some time to clear his head. The warm night air wrapped around him like a comforting blanket, and the distant hum of the palace seemed to fade into the background. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice Zalira until she was standing just a few feet away from him. She was alone, as she often was when the crowds had gone home and the palace grew quiet. Her hair shimmered silver under the moonlight, and her violet eyes held a sadness that spoke volumes. When she saw him, she didn't say anything right away. She simply stood there as though waiting for him to speak. "Princess," Jace said softly, unsure if he should approach. "I didn't expect to find you here." Zalira smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I come here when I need to think. Away from the noise, away from the constant pressure. It's the only time I can truly breathe." Jace nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I know what you mean. It's hard to think straight when you're constantly surrounded by people." She took a step closer, her eyes searching his face. "You're different from the others. I don't know why, but I can't help but feel like you understand. I've never been able to speak so freely before." Her words hit Jace hard. He had never expected her to trust him, not after only a few conversations. But there was something about her, a vulnerability that made him want to protect her, to shield her from the weight of the world that seemed to rest on her shoulders. "I understand more than you think," Jace said quietly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm not a prince or a ruler, but I know what it's like to feel like you're not in control of your own life." Zalira's expression softened, and she stepped even closer. "Do you? What is it like to be free?" Jace paused, considering her question. "It's not always easy. Freedom comes with its own set of challenges, but I think it's worth it, to live for yourself, to make your own choices." Zalira looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edges of the royal rings that adorned her fingers. "I've never had that choice. Everything has always been decided for me. My future, my people, my marriage, all of it." She paused, and her voice trembled slightly. "And I've never questioned it, not until now, not until I met you." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Jace's heart raced in his chest, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her that she deserved more than the life that had been forced upon her. But he knew better than to offer false hope. He wasn't sure how he could help her, or even if he could. The political landscape was far more complicated than either of them realized. "I'm not sure I have the answers," Jace said finally, his voice low. "But I do know this. You don't have to face this alone. You have people who care about you. You have me." Zalira looked up at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. For a moment, Jace thought she might say something, but instead she simply nodded. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. They stood in silence for a long time, the only sound the rustling of the leaves in the breeze. Jace wasn't sure what he was waiting for, but something about this moment felt important. He wasn't sure if it was the weight of their conversation or the quiet connection that had been growing between them. But when Zalira finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I can't just leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The people depend on me. My family depends on me. I am the only one who can hold this empire together." Jace felt a pang of sympathy for her. He understood duty, he understood loyalty. But he also knew that sometimes duty could destroy a person from the inside out. "You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders," Jace said gently. "You have a choice, Zalira. You may not see it right now, but you do." Zalira shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "If I leave, everything will fall apart. The empire will fall apart." "And if you stay?" Jace asked softly, his eyes locked onto hers. "What happens then?" For a long moment, Zalira didn't answer. She simply looked at him, her gaze searching for something, perhaps for reassurance or perhaps for a way out. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I don't know anymore." Jace took a step closer to her, his hand reaching out, not in a gesture of comfort, but in an offer of understanding, of solidarity. "You don't have to know right now," he said. "But know this, you are not alone. You don't have to face this empire or your future by yourself." Zalira met his gaze, her heart heavy with the weight of her decisions. She knew that Jace was right. She didn't have to carry the burden alone. But the fear of losing everything, of failing her people, was overwhelming. She wasn't sure if she was strong enough to make the choice he was asking of her. "I'll think about it," she whispered, the words barely audible. Jace nodded, understanding the complexity of her situation. He couldn't give her the answers she was searching for, but he could offer her a chance at freedom, a chance to choose her own path, even if it meant walking away from everything she had ever known. As they stood there in the quiet of the garden, Jace couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would Zalira choose freedom, or would she remain tied to the empire that had always controlled her? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Their paths were now intertwined, and whatever choice Zalira made, it would change both their lives forever. The days after their conversation were tense, filled with an uncertainty neither Jace nor Zalira could ignore. The weight of the choices she had to make pressed down on her more with each passing moment. Despite her royal duties, despite the empire that needed her, Zalira found herself growing more restless. She spent her nights staring out of her palace window, looking out at the stars, wondering if the future was really set in stone, or if just maybe she could change it. Jace had kept his distance as much as he could, respecting her need to make her own decision. But every time their paths crossed in the palace, his presence seemed to provide a silent comfort, a reminder that she didn't have to face this alone. Yet, Zalira couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Her brother, Prince Aaron, had begun to tighten his hold over the empire's politics. He had started to make public speeches, rallying the people with promises of a stronger, more aggressive rule. Zalira had always known that Aaron harbored ambitions for the throne, but now it was clear that his intentions were no longer subtle. If she didn't act soon, the empire would fall into his hands, and she would become nothing more than a figurehead. It was in one of these moments of fear and uncertainty that Zalira decided to seek out Jace again. She had been avoiding him for days, unsure of how to express what she was feeling. But now, as the weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest, she realized she couldn't make it alone. She found him standing in one of the palace's many corridors, his back to her as he stared out of the window. The soft light of the setting sun bathed his face in a warm glow, and for a moment, she simply watched him. There was something calming about the way he stood, as if the world didn't bother him as much as it did her. Jace must have sensed her presence because he turned around, his gaze locking with hers immediately. There was no surprise in his eyes, just a quiet understanding. "I thought you might come," he said, his voice calm, yet filled with concern. Zalira took a deep breath, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't seem to organize. "I can't do this anymore, Jace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jace stepped closer, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean I can't be the princess anymore," Zalira said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I can't be this person everyone expects me to be. I don't know who I am anymore, Jace. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Jace's heart tightened as he listened to her words. He had known she was struggling, but hearing her admit it out loud made the weight of her pain feel even more real. "Zalira, you don't have to make this decision alone," he said softly. "Whatever you decide, I'm here. I'll stand by you." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but for the first time in a long time, Zalira felt a flicker of hope. "But what if I choose the wrong thing? What if I leave and the empire falls apart? What if I abandon everyone who needs me?" Jace reached out, his hand gently resting on her arm. "Sometimes you have to make choices that are right for you. You can't live your whole life carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. You deserve to live for yourself, too." Zalira swallowed hard, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can leave my people behind." "You're not leaving them behind," Jace said, his voice firm yet gentle. "You're giving yourself the chance to be the person you're meant to be. The princess, the ruler, the woman, whatever you want to be. But you can't keep sacrificing yourself for the sake of everyone else. You have to take control of your own future." Zalira's heart ached as she listened to him. She had spent so much of her life serving the empire, so much of her time living up to the expectations of her family and people. But what if, just for once, she could make a choice that was entirely her own? What if she could walk away and finally breathe again? "But if I walk away," she said quietly, "what will become of the empire, the people? They need me. They need a strong leader." Jace took a deep breath, his hand still resting on her arm, offering her the stability she so desperately needed. "Zalira, you are strong, but strength doesn't come from doing what others expect of you. It comes from making the choices that are true to who you are. If you stay, you'll be living someone else's life. If you leave, you'll be choosing your own. No matter what happens with the empire, your people will see your strength in the choices you make." Zalira closed her eyes, the weight of his words settling in her chest. Could she really walk away from everything she had known? Could she turn her back on her family, on the legacy of her people, for a chance at freedom? But something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the only way she could truly be free. She opened her eyes and looked at Jace, her voice shaking as she spoke. "What if I leave and it all falls apart? What if the empire crumbles without me?" Jace gave her a reassuring smile, though there was a sadness in his eyes. "If you leave, Zalira, it won't be because of you. You didn't create the system that's been holding you prisoner all these years, but you can be the one to change it. It's your choice, and no matter what you decide, I'll be with you." For a long time, Zalira stood there, her mind racing as she processed his words. It felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest, but the path ahead was still unclear. Could she really let go of everything she had ever known? Could she truly leave behind her title, her family, her responsibility? "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Jace gently cupped her face with his hand, his eyes warm with understanding. "You are stronger than you think, Zalira. I believe in you." For the first time in days, a tear slipped from her eye, and Zalira allowed herself to close her eyes, leaning into his touch. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding in until now. The burden of expectation, the fear of failure, the constant pressure to be someone she wasn't, it had all come crashing down around her. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I know that I can't keep living like this." Jace's thumb gently brushed away the tear that had fallen from her cheek. "Then don't live like this anymore." Zalira looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Jace had shown her a glimpse of what freedom could look like, and that was enough to make her believe that there was still hope. "I'll think about it," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jace nodded, understanding the gravity of her decision. "You don't have to decide right away. Take your time. Just remember, no matter what you choose, I'll be here." For the first time in what felt like forever, Zalira felt like the weight of her world wasn't so heavy. Maybe she didn't have all the answers yet, but she had one thing that she hadn't had before, the freedom to choose. As she stood there, gazing up at Jace, a sense of peace began to settle in her heart. She wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to make her own path, no matter how uncertain it seemed. The following days were filled with uncertainty, but also with a quiet kind of resolution. Zalira spent her time walking the palace grounds, speaking with a few trusted advisors, and trying to find some clarity in the chaos that surrounded her. The pressure to make a decision was constant, weighing heavily on her mind. Yet something had changed inside her. The conversation with Jace had opened a door, and now, for the first time in her life, Zalira felt as though she had a choice. A real one. A choice that was hers and hers alone. Her brother, Prince Aaron, had grown bolder in his actions. He continued to make speeches, rallying the people with promises of strength, of conquest, of power. Every time Zalira saw him, she could feel his ambition burning brightly, an ambition that was beginning to threaten the very foundation of the Zarethian Empire. But Zalira wasn't sure if she could be the one to stop him. She wasn't sure if she was strong enough to face the empire she had always known, to challenge the life she had been taught to lead. Still, her heart was torn. Could she truly walk away from it all? Could she leave behind her family, her legacy, her people in order to find a life of her own? Zalira knew she had to make a choice soon. The longer she waited, the more Aaron would solidify his position. The empire was on the edge, and she was the only one who could stop him or step aside. She hadn't spoken to Jace in a few days, allowing herself the time and space to think. Yet every time she thought about him, a feeling of warmth washed over her. He had given her the courage to look at her life through a different lens. He hadn't told her what to do or tried to make her decision for her. Instead, he had given her the freedom to choose, and for that she was grateful. It was in the early hours of the morning, just before the first rays of sunlight lit the sky, that Zalira knew what she had to do. She couldn't keep running from her responsibilities, nor could she remain trapped by the expectations of her family. It was time to step into her own future, no matter how daunting it seemed. Zalira went to the palace gardens that morning, the place where she had often sought solace in the quiet of nature. The flowers had long since begun to bloom, their colors brightening the otherwise still morning. She walked slowly, her thoughts consumed by the decision she had made. She knew what she had to do. She would confront her brother. She would challenge him. She would not let him tear the empire apart with his reckless ambition, but she would do it on her own terms. She would no longer be the princess who was tied to a destiny she never chose. She would be a leader, one who made her own decisions. The future of the empire would be in her hands, but only if she was willing to take that responsibility fully. As Zalira walked through the garden, she was surprised to find Jace there. He was standing by the fountain, his eyes turned toward the horizon, as if deep in thought. When he saw her approach, his face softened, a quiet understanding passing between them. "I was hoping I'd find you here," he said gently. Zalira smiled faintly. "I've spent so many hours in this garden thinking." Jace nodded, his gaze soft and encouraging. "And what have you decided?" Zalira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her choice settle in her chest. "I've decided to fight for the Empire, but not the way it's been done before." Jace looked at her, his expression a mix of admiration and curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I'm going to challenge Aaron," she said, her voice steady with newfound determination. "I won't let him take over without a fight, but I won't do it in the way everyone expects. I won't play the part of the perfect princess anymore. I will fight for the future of this empire on my own terms." Jace's face lit up with pride. "Zalira, that's incredible." Zalira met his gaze, her eyes filled with both fear and excitement. "I don't know what will happen, Jace. I don't know if I'll win or if I'll lose. But I can't keep living this lie. I have to be true to myself." Jace stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "No matter what happens, you're not alone. I'll be with you every step of the way." Zalira's heart swelled with gratitude. She had always been alone in her struggle, carrying the weight of her family's expectations, the burden of an empire that didn't allow her to be herself. But now, for the first time, she felt like she had someone in her corner. "I don't even know how to thank you, Jace," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "You've given me the strength to see this differently. You've shown me that I have a choice." "You don't have to thank me," Jace replied, his voice warm and sincere. "I'm just happy I could help you see that. You've always had the strength within you, Zalira. I just gave you a little push." Zalira smiled, feeling the weight of her decision ease just a little. She wasn't alone. She had a choice. She had a future. And that future was hers to shape. Later that day, Zalira stood before her brother, Prince Aaron. He was seated on the throne, his expression one of arrogant confidence as he looked down at her. His advisors flanked him, their eyes wary but curious as Zalira stepped into the throne room. "You're here," Aaron said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I knew you would come, sister. I'm sure you've come to beg for my forgiveness." Zalira stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance. "I'm not here to beg, Aaron. I'm here to tell you that I will not allow you to take control of this empire, not by force and not by manipulation." Aaron's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a puppet of our father's legacy." Zalira took a step forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am not a puppet. I am the future of this empire, and I will do whatever it takes to ensure it survives on my terms." For a long moment, there was silence. Aaron studied her, and for the first time, Zalira saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. She had always been the one to follow in his shadow, but now she stood before him as an equal. "You've always been weak," Aaron spat, standing up from his throne. "You think you can just walk away from your responsibilities, Zalira? You are the princess. You are the one who will lead this empire, whether you like it or not." Zalira stood her ground, her voice calm but fierce. "Not anymore. I will lead this empire, but only if it's on my terms. I will not be controlled by you or anyone else." Aaron's face turned red with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Maybe," Zalira replied, her tone steady, "but at least I will have lived my life the way I choose." The tension in the room was palpable, but Zalira didn't flinch. She knew this was just the beginning of a long battle, one that would determine not only the future of the empire but her future as well. As she turned to leave, Jace's words echoed in her mind. "No matter what happens, you're not alone." Zalira knew now more than ever that she had made the right choice. No matter the outcome, she had taken control of her life, and for the first time she was free.